His finger was on the trigger. One squeeze, and the bullet would tear through the air, drop a rare male lion, and wipe out a mountain of debt he couldn't carry anymore. It was supposed to be just another hunt until a small gray figure stepped into his scope. A baby elephant, frail and trembling, leaned against the thick mane of the lion who should have killed it. And in that moment, the man, a former Marine who'd spent years surviving by the gun, didn't take the shot. He didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. And the story you're about to hear is why. The sun was already high over the Namibian savanna, bleaching the dry grass to gold and dust. Heat shimmered on the horizon, distorting the shapes of acacia trees and far-off termite mounds. Wyatt Cole lay prone on the ridge, rifle steady, breath measured, scope fixed. He'd been tracking the lion for 4 days. It was a magnificent animal, a fully grown male, dark-maned, massive in the chest. The kind of trophy hunters paid tens of thousands of dollars for. This one, a European client with more money than conscience, had wired payment in advance. The lion had no idea he was in the crosshairs. Wyatt's finger hovered near the trigger. Just a bit of pressure, and it would all be over. The roar of the rifle, the slump of a body, a clean kill. Efficient, no wasted time, no unnecessary suffering. He knew how to do it, had done it for years. 23 confirmed trophy kills on record. That wasn't counting the combat tours before all this. Afghanistan, Syria, Colombia. He didn't talk about those, didn't think about them if he could help it. But he needed the money. The lawsuit from his brother's accident was eating through what little he had left. Hospital bills, lawyer fees, everything stacked and teetering. This loan, this single pull of a trigger, would buy him a few months of breathing room. A little dignity, some distance from the edge of collapse. Steady, he whispered to himself. Just breathe. The lion moved into better view, stepping from behind a clump of brush, body glistening with sweat and dust. A perfect profile. He paused, turned his head, and then Wyatt saw it. A flicker of movement, small, gray. At first he thought it was a trick of the heat, but it wasn't. Just to the lion's left, barely reaching its flank, stood a baby elephant, thin, stumbling, no more than a few months old. Its skin hung loose across a too small frame, ribs visible, ears too large for its head. Wyatt blinked. The calf was standing next to the lion, close enough to be mauled, crushed, torn apart with one swipe of those heavy paws. But the lion wasn't attacking. It wasn't even alert. It stood calmly, letting the calf lean its side against him. The cub, no, the baby, nudged the lion's leg with its trunk, weak and unsteady, like it was looking for warmth. Wyatt's breath caught. For a long moment his body went rigid. This didn't make sense. Lions killed baby elephants. Everyone knew that. It was brutal, but it was how nature worked. Predators and prey, apex and vulnerable. That's the hierarchy of the wild. Nature didn't do compassion. So what the hell was this? Wyatt lowered the rifle slightly, not quite pulling away from the shot, but no longer committed either. Through the scope, he zoomed in on the calf. It looked dehydrated, lost. Its movements were clumsy, uncoordinated. It had no herd. A baby elephant without a family was as good as dead in this landscape. 2, maybe 3 days before dehydration claimed it, if predators didn't get there first. Except this predator wasn't killing it. Wyatt's stomach twisted. He'd seen strange things in the wild. Lions playing with dead prey, crocodiles ignoring easy kills. But this wasn't confusion. This was protection. The lion moved slowly, positioning itself between the calf and the wind. It lowered its head, eyes scanning the horizon, alert, but not hunting. Wyatt sat back from the scope, letting the rifle rest in the sand. What the hell is going on? He glanced at the sky. Midday, no shade, heat pushing down on everything. He took a long pull from his canteen, still watching the pair below. The lion nudged the calf forward. It stumbled, legs shaking. The lion waited. When the calf didn't move, the lion began to dig, with powerful, deliberate swipes of his paws into the sandy bank of the dried riverbed. A minute passed, then another. Dust rose. Finally, the lion stepped back. The baby stepped forward and reached its trunk into the pit. Muddy water. Not much, but enough. It drank, slow and clumsy. The lion stood nearby, unmoving. Wyatt's mouth went dry. Not from thirst, but from something else. A feeling he didn't like recognizing. He'd seen soldiers cradle wounded children, seen men carry enemies across minefields because the alternative was worse. He'd learned to ignore those things, feel them too much, and you didn't last. But this lion, this damn lion, had chosen to protect. He felt something shifting inside him, something old and unwelcome. He looked down at the rifle. The scope still held the lion's chest in perfect view. One shot. Done. A contract fulfilled. No one would know what he'd seen. No one would question the kill. Except he would. And right now, watching a lion stand guard over a dying baby elephant, he no longer wanted to be the kind of man who could make that shot. Not today. He flicked the safety on, laid the rifle across his lap, and picked up the satellite phone. Hands shaking. He typed, "Contract unfulfilled. Animal behavior outside expected range. Recommend observation. Will remain on site." He hit send. The reply came 10 minutes later. "Contract canceled. Final payment forfeit. Return to base." Wyatt looked back through the scope one last time. The lion was resting now, the calf curled beside him. Wyatt leaned into the shade of the rock behind him, the heat pressing in from all sides, and for the first time in years, he had no idea what the hell he was doing. But something in him whispered, "Stay. Watch. This isn't over." By morning, the wind had shifted. Wyatt woke stiff and sore, his back pressed against a sun-warmed boulder, his rifle unused, his decision still echoing through the silence of the bush. He hadn't slept much, just enough to let the thoughts settle, though none of them brought peace. Below, in the low dip of the dried riverbed, the lion and the calf were still there. The light was gentler now, slanting sideways through the haze. The lion stood facing east, his mane rippling faintly in the breeze. The calf, still clumsy, still too small, pressed close to the lion's side, its tiny trunk resting on the lion's foreleg. It was like watching two species rewrite the rules of the wild. Wyatt kept low, crawling to the same spot he'd scoped from yesterday. No movement from them suggested alarm. He was far enough not to be a threat, yet close enough to see the rise and fall of their breathing. He didn't understand it, not really. Animals didn't do this. They didn't choose to protect members of other species, especially ones they were supposed to prey on. This wasn't a trained lion or a rescued elephant in a sanctuary. These were wild creatures. This was real, and it wasn't supposed to happen. Wyatt scanned the area through his binoculars. No other elephants in sight, no fresh tracks, no distant trumpet calls. That baby had been alone for a while, long enough to be starving. He could see it in the way the calf moved, trembling legs, slow reaction, eyelids heavy. Without the lion, it would have died already. But the lion had stayed. Wyatt felt a knot tighten in his chest. He knew what that kind of grief looked like, when someone you loved was gone, and all that was left was an empty shape you couldn't fill. He remembered standing in the ICU hallway, watching the nurses unhook the machines from his little brother's broken body, knowing he'd never hear his laugh again, never fix what he'd said during that last fight. He hadn't cried that day, but now, watching a lion stand between a dying elephant and everything that could hurt it, Wyatt felt something sting behind his eyes. It didn't make sense, but it didn't have to. Somewhere beneath the surface, something old and instinctual had kicked in, for the lion and maybe for Wyatt too. He sat back against the ridge, elbows on his knees, and whispered, "What are you doing, old man? You're supposed to finish the job. You don't even know what you're watching." But deep down he did. It was survival, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, whatever the hell that meant out here. The lion had lost something, maybe a cub of its own. The calf had lost its mother. And somewhere along the way, they had found each other. That kind of bond didn't follow rules. Wyatt knew he should go. The safari company would already have flagged him for breach of contract. If he stayed too long, they might send someone to retrieve him, or worse, someone to finish the job he'd walked away from. But his boots didn't move. Instead, he pulled his small pack around and took inventory. A week's worth of food if he stretched it. Powdered milk he'd brought for emergency hydration. Not ideal for a baby elephant, but it might be something. He had a water purifier, a camp stove, a basic medical kit, and not much else. He didn't plan for this kind of work. No one did. He considered approaching them, but stopped himself. That lion wouldn't let anyone near that calf, not without a fight. And Wyatt knew what kind of damage a lion could do in close quarters. He'd have to earn their trust. For now, observation was all he had. He jotted notes in a weather-worn field journal. Time of day, behavior, interaction between species, distance maintained, protective responses. He wasn't sure who he was doing it for, himself or the ghost of the man he used to be. Late afternoon settled in, the heat hung heavy, and the savannah went quiet, as if holding its breath. Wyatt saw movement again. The calf stumbled near a small mound, its knees buckling. The lion was there in a second, nudging it back up with his head. Then, almost gently, he lay down and let the calf rest against his flank. A memory surfaced. Wyatt, as a boy, holding his brother's hand in the dark after a storm. No words, just being there. He felt the weight of the rifle at his side. It hadn't moved since yesterday. Still loaded, still functional, but it meant nothing now. Not against this. That night he set up camp farther up the ridge, just close enough to watch. No fire, no unnecessary noise. The stars came out like they always did, indifferent and brilliant, and the wild stayed quiet. Somewhere below, a baby elephant dreamed against the warmth of a lion who should have killed him. And a man who had spent most of his life taking lives began to wonder, for the first time in a long time, if this was what it meant to protect something that wasn't yours. By the fourth morning, Wyatt had developed a rhythm. Quiet observation by dawn, minimal movement during heat hours, notes taken in the margins of his field journal. He didn't approach, not yet. The lion still watched him with that steady amber stare, not hostile, not welcoming either, more like tolerating. The calf was weaker than the day before, its steps slower, trunk dragging. It was surviving, but just barely. Wyatt didn't know how much longer it could go without real nutrition. And that lion, Zulu he'd started calling him, was doing everything he could. Digging for water, standing guard at night, even fending off a pair of hyenas that crept in from the west. Wyatt had watched the fight through binoculars. Zulu had gone at them without hesitation, blood flying, his roar echoing across the plain like thunder. A predator defending prey. Wyatt couldn't explain it, but he understood it, more than he wanted to. He sat with his back against a scrubby mopon tree, eyes gritty from another sleepless night. His radio was off. His satellite phone had no new messages. That was either a good thing or a sign the company had washed their hands of him entirely. Didn't matter now. What mattered was what he saw through the scope this morning. Zulu lying on his side, ribs moving slow, blood still dried along one flank from the fight. The calf was curled next to him, sleeping, and then came the sound. Engines. Low, distant, but closing fast. Wyatt froze. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. Dust cloud. 2 vehicles. Old pickups, flatbed types with metal rails and canvas covers. Hunters, not tourists. Local contractors, most likely. Called in by the safari company to finish the job. He cursed under his breath, slinging his pack over one shoulder, grabbing the rifle without thinking. Not to use it, just to carry. His boots hit the sand hard as he moved downslope, keeping low, weaving between brush. They'd reach the riverbed in minutes. He met them halfway. 3 men climbed out, weapons at the ready, all lean, sun-baked, seasoned. The kind of men who'd shot lions before breakfast and didn't lose sleep over it. The one in front, mid-50s, gray beard, long knife strapped to his thigh, looked Wyatt over. "You Mercer?" Wyatt didn't answer right away. The man jerked a thumb toward the west. "You've been sitting on a kill for 4 days. Company says it's time to wrap this up." Wyatt stood his ground. "It's not that simple. Simple's not our job. Killing is." "There's a calf," Wyatt said. "A baby elephant. It's with the lion. He's not hunting it. He's protecting it." The men laughed, not cruelly, just the way people laugh when they hear something stupid from someone who should know better. The older one stopped smiling first. "That your excuse now? We don't get paid for stories, Mercer. We get paid for heads." "I'm telling you," Wyatt said, voice low, steady. "There's something different happening here." "Different don't matter," the man said, reaching for his rifle. "The animal's worth 20 grand. You want to walk away from that? Fine. But don't get in our way." Wyatt stepped forward, rifle still slung, hands open. "If you fire that shot, you kill something you don't understand, and maybe that don't matter to you, but it does to me." There was a beat of silence, a long one. Then the man narrowed his eyes. "You lost the stomach for it, Mercer? Thought you were a Marine." Wyatt didn't flinch. "I was, still am. That's why I know when it's time to stop fighting." The tension broke when a 4th man stepped from the second truck, younger, tall, chewing a toothpick. "Let him have it," he muttered to the older man. "You know the company'll still dock his pay either way. No skin off ours." The leader eyed Wyatt like he was trying to decide whether he was stupid or brave. Maybe both. Then he gave a grunt, spit into the dust, and turned back toward the trucks. "Fine. You want the freak show, you keep it, but don't say we didn't warn you." They left in a storm of gravel and exhaust. Wyatt watched until the last dust trail faded. His pulse was still spiking. He hadn't realized how close he'd come to being shot himself. He turned and looked back toward the riverbed. Zulu was standing now, barely, watching. He'd heard the voices, maybe even recognized Wyatt's. The calf was at his side again, trunk tangled in the lion's mane. Wyatt let out a slow breath. He'd just burned every bridge he had left in this business. No paycheck, no backup, no extraction plan. But something deeper than logic told him he'd made the right call. He'd bought them time. Now the hard part began. By the time the sun had settled at its peak, Wyatt knew he had to try something. The calf was fading, more than he'd seen the day before. It barely moved now. only lifting its head to nudge Zulu's leg or reach weakly for the dry grass around them. The lion stayed close, his own movements slower, ribs more visible with every breath. It was clear Zulu had given most of his energy to protection, not hunting, not eating. And the calf. It couldn't survive on muddy water alone. Wyatt crouched under a camel thorn tree and poured powdered milk into a shallow metal bowl. It wasn't elephant formula, not close, but it was all he had. He stirred in water, added a pinch of salt, a little sugar, something to give it electrolytes. It wouldn't last more than an hour in the heat. His heart thudded as he stood, bowl in hand. The rifle stayed behind this time. 50 yards out, he slowed his pace. No sudden moves, no eye contact. He kept his body language neutral, something he'd learned in combat zones. Never challenge unless you're ready to finish it. Zulu saw him. The lion lifted his head. Eyes locked. The deep rumble started in his chest, a low warning that resonated through the ground more than the air. Wyatt stopped, kneeling. He didn't speak, just set the bowl down slowly and pushed it forward a few feet, then backed away, palms open. He waited. Minutes passed. Sweat beaded down his neck. The sun scorched his shoulders. His knees ached from the hard-packed dirt. Zulu didn't move, but the calf did. It stirred, lifting its head, eyes dull but curious. It shifted its weight, wobbled upright, and took one uncertain step toward the bowl. Then another. Zulu stood fast, moved between the calf and Wyatt. His tail twitched once. His ears tilted back. Wyatt's pulse spiked, but Zulu didn't charge. He just stood there, tense, guarding. Then, without warning, he stepped aside. The calf moved past him, trunk outstretched. It dipped into the bowl and drank, greedily, sloppily. Milk spilled over the edges, ran down its chin, soaked into the dirt. Zulu watched. Wyatt didn't breathe. Boo! When the calf finished, it looked up, right at him. Not with fear, with something else. Hunger, maybe. Trust, maybe. It didn't matter. The line had been crossed. Wyatt stood slowly, retrieved the empty bowl, and backed away. That night he slept light but hopeful. The next morning he did it again. Same approach, same bowl, same distance. The calf was waiting this time. By day 3, a routine had formed. The lion didn't growl anymore. He didn't relax either, but he allowed Wyatt into the outer circle of their strange world. Enough to feed the calf, enough to matter. Wyatt named the baby Theo, short for Theodore, his brother's middle name. He hadn't meant to. It had just slipped out one morning while he was mixing the formula. "You better drink up, Theo. I'm running out of supplies." And after saying it, he couldn't call the calf anything else. He called the lion Zulu because the name felt old, regal, like something earned, not given. As days passed, Theo grew marginally stronger, his steps steadier, his movements more deliberate. He started to mimic Zulu, resting the same way, walking in his shadow, occasionally bumping the lion's flank like a cub seeking affection. Zulu, for his part, didn't push the calf away. He tolerated the closeness, protected it, even shared what little shade he found during the worst heat hours. Wyatt watched all of it, sometimes forgetting to write in his journal. He caught himself staring, trying to figure out how this made any sense, how nature could bend this way without breaking, how a predator could become a parent, how a man like him, who had made a life from the end of things, could sit here and help something live. One morning he caught his reflection in the metal bowl as he filled it, sun-darkened skin, hollow cheeks, a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. He didn't recognize the man looking back, and maybe that was the point. This wasn't about money anymore. or contracts, or clearing debts. He'd given up all of that the moment he didn't pull the trigger. Now it was about something else, something harder to name. Redemption? Maybe purpose? Possibly. He only knew one thing for sure. He wasn't leaving until Theo had a real chance to live. And Zulu, whatever instincts had turned him into a guardian, was teaching Wyatt something he hadn't felt in years. What it meant to choose life over survival. On the 9th day, the sky turned the color of bruises. A storm was building somewhere beyond the northern hills, too far to offer rain, close enough to press down on the earth like a weight. Even the wind felt heavy, thick with dust and the scent of tension. Wyatt had been sleeping in shifts, running on stale granola bars and what little water he could purify. His supplies were nearly gone. He'd stretched them thin feeding Theo, canned fruit mashed into pulp, powdered milk mixed thinner with each passing day, whatever nutrition he could cobble together. The calf was better. Not strong, but better. Theo moved with more purpose now. Trunk more coordinated, eyes clearer. He followed Zulu constantly, almost like a shadow. Whenever Wyatt approached with the bowl, Theo would perk up, letting out a soft squeal that Wyatt had come to recognize as anticipation. Trust had taken root, but time was running out, and that morning it came for them. Wyatt was returning from the small spring he'd been using, 2 canteens slung from his belt when he heard it. The sound of birds scattering, a low growl in the distance. Then gunshots. 2. Not close, but not far, either. He dropped to a crouch instinctively, scanned the horizon. Nothing yet. But something was wrong, deeply wrong. He sprinted the last stretch toward the ridge, breath hammering in his chest, and dropped flat behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the riverbed. Zulu was standing, mane bristled, head low. Blood streaked one of his flanks. Theo was crying, high-pitched, panicked, trunk flailing. And across the dry basin, just vanishing into the tree line, were 2 human shapes. One carried a rifle. The other turned briefly, enough for Wyatt to recognize the younger man from the hunter trucks days before. "Damn it," Wyatt muttered. They'd come back, likely figured they could get the kill without his interference. No trucks this time, just 2 men on foot, hoping for a clean shot, and no witnesses. They'd gotten their shot, but not their lion. Zulu staggered. The blood wasn't gushing, but it wasn't minor either. A red trail painted his hind leg and soaked into the sand beneath him. Wyatt didn't think. He moved. Down the ridge, past the thorn brush, straight toward a wounded predator and a terrified elephant calf. No rifle this time. No plan. Theo saw him first, squealing louder, stumbling toward him. Zulu growled, weakly, but didn't charge. Wyatt raised his hands. "It's me," he said, voice low, calm. "I'm here." Zulu lowered his head, body trembling. Theo pressed his side into Wyatt's hip, and Wyatt ran a hand gently along the calf's back, feeling the tremor of fear still rippling through him. Then he turned to Zulu. The lion had collapsed onto his side, panting. The wound was high on the leg, maybe through the muscle. No exit wound. Not fatal. Yet, but bad enough to slow him down. Bad enough to get him killed if those men came back. Wyatt dropped to his knees beside the lion, reaching slowly. "Easy, buddy, easy." Zulu didn't snap, didn't flinch. He let the man touch him. The fur around the wound was matted with blood, already beginning to stiffen. Wyatt tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it against the hole, applying pressure. Not perfect, not even good, but better than nothing. Theo cried softly beside them, and Wyatt understood something in that moment he hadn't wanted to face until now. He wasn't going to save both of them alone, not with what little he had left. He needed help. Real help. But help meant exposure. It meant someone else coming out here. seeing what he'd seen, maybe even taking control. The story could spin any direction. Still, watching Zulu bleed into the dirt, Wyatt knew he didn't have a choice. He pulled the satellite phone from his bag and turned it on. Battery flashing red. 1 bar. He opened a message draft. Fingers shaky. Lion injured. Elephant calf still alive. Behavior continues outside expected norms. Request urgent observation team. Sending coordinates. Please, do not shoot. He sent it to a contact he barely knew, someone he'd met years ago from a conservation group working in this region. A gamble. Then he sat back, hands on his knees, blood soaking through the cloth in his hands. Zulu lifted his head weakly and looked at him, not like an animal looks at a threat, but like he was still deciding what Wyatt was. He whispered, "I'm not walking away, not now." He stayed there until night fell. Holding pressure, whispering nonsense to keep himself steady, Theo curled beside his leg. Somewhere beyond the trees, men with guns had melted into the bush. But Wyatt knew they'd be back. And when they came, he'd be ready, not as a hunter, but as something else entirely. The 12th morning broke hot and windless. The sky was pale and cloudless, the air thick and unmoving. Dust clung to Wyatt's skin like sweat, and every breath felt dry as chalk. Zulu was still alive, barely. The makeshift bandage had slowed the bleeding, but infection was setting in. Wyatt could smell it, sour and metallic, each time he crouched to change the cloth. The lion no longer growled when he approached, no longer moved much at all. He just watched. Those amber eyes followed Wyatt's every motion with quiet awareness. And something else, something Wyatt couldn't name. Theo stayed close, never more than a few feet from Zulu. When the lion slept, the calf nudged gently at his mane, as if checking to make sure he was still breathing. Wyatt had done the same thing once, sitting by his brother's hospital bed. It was the same kind of helplessness, the same silent pleading. Late in the afternoon, as the heat pushed everything into stillness, Wyatt heard it. A deep, low vibration, faint but steady. He stilled, turned his head toward the west. Then he heard it again, closer this time. An elephant's call. Not distant, not imagined. Real. He stood fast, scanning the horizon. Dust shimmered in the distance. Movement. Shapes. A herd, large, moving slowly across the savanna in single file. At least 20 elephants. Adults, calves, family. Wyatt's heart caught in his throat. He turned to Theo. The calf had gone rigid, ears lifted, trunk stretched toward the sound. A call rose from deep in his chest, thin and unsteady, but full of recognition. He knew. Somewhere in that moving mass was someone who belonged to him, a mother, a matriarch, a memory. Theo began to walk, stumbling, eager, trembling with energy he hadn't shown in days. Wyatt didn't try to stop him. He just followed. Zulu, after a moment's hesitation, rose too. The lion moved slowly, dragging his injured leg, but he followed the same path, step for step, behind the calf. The three of them, man, predator, and orphan, moved together across the plain. The herd came into focus, giant bodies swaying, trunks brushing against one another, protective circles forming instinctively. They'd seen Theo, and then one of them broke away. A large female, massive and fast, tore across the grass, trumpeting loud enough to shake the sky. Her trunk reached out, her pace frantic, her cries rising in waves. Theo cried back, his voice high and shaking, and broke into a run. Wyatt stopped walking. He didn't need to go any further. He watched as the elephant calf reached her. She wrapped her trunk around his small body and held him close. Two others joined, flanking them, touching him, guarding. Family. Undeniable. The reunion was messy and loud and beautiful. Wyatt's throat tightened. But Zulu had stopped moving. The lion stood about 50 yards back, shoulders hunched, head low, watching. He didn't approach, didn't make a sound. He just stood there. Still, Theo turned in the middle of the huddle, twisted his body to look back. His trunk lifted, not in confusion, not in fear, in farewell. Wyatt took a slow step toward Zulu. The lion didn't move. He approached carefully, stopping just close enough to be seen, no more than 10 feet between them. Then he did something reckless. He reached out, not quickly, not threatening, just a hand, slow and open, until it touched Zulu's shoulder. A second passed, maybe 2. The lion didn't pull away. And in that one breath of contact, Wyatt felt the tremble in the animal's body. Not fear, not pain, grief. Zulu let out a low rumble in his chest, then turned slowly and began to walk the other direction. Not fast, but deliberate, away from the calf, away from the herd. Not because he had to, because he chose to. Wyatt watched him go, and when he looked back, the elephants were moving again, with Theo nestled tightly in the center of them. Safe. Home. The decision had been made. The chapter closed. The job wasn't done. Not really. But the impossible part, the fragile, breathtaking miracle they'd stumbled into, that part had ended. And the hardest thing left to do was what Zulu had already done. Let go. Wyatt stood there for a long time, eyes stinging, heart full of something that hurt and healed all at once. He turned back toward camp as the sun dropped behind the acacia trees, its light stretching long across the plain. He didn't know what came next, but he knew who he was now, not a hunter, not anymore. Wyatt spent the night alone for the first time in days. No Theo curled beside him. No Zulu's heavy breathing just beyond the firelight. The quiet was deeper now, thick and final. It wasn't the absence of sound that struck him, but the absence of presence. He built a small fire, mostly for comfort. Not that he needed the heat, but the flickering light gave his hands something to focus on. He watched the flames dance against the dark, each flicker like the tail end of a memory. He thought about calling someone. The satellite phone sat beside him, low on battery, blinking red, but there was no one to call. Not really. His brother was gone. The people who owed him money didn't care what he'd just witnessed. And the people who might care, they weren't the ones who could understand what this meant. He reached into his pack and pulled out the rifle. It still had one round chambered. He held it across his knees, the way he used to after a hunt, checking the action, wiping down the barrel, respecting the tool that had made him a living for 15 years. But this time felt different. The rifle was clean, unused, useless now. He'd carried it all this way like a piece of who he used to be, dragging it through the desert as if it still served a purpose. It didn't. Not anymore. In the morning, as the light crept over the ridge, Wyatt packed his gear in silence. No ceremony, just what was necessary. He left behind the fire ring, the extra tarp, anything he didn't need for the long walk ahead. The rifle he carried last. Not slung over his shoulder this time. He held it like a weight he no longer wanted. 2 miles from the old ridge he reached the edge of a ravine, deep, overgrown, filled with thorns and bone-dry brush. He stopped, looked down at the rifle one more time, then hurled it forward with everything he had. It spun through the air, end over end, before disappearing into the tangle below. There was no sound when it landed, just silence, and that, somehow, felt right. The walk back to civilization took the better part of 2 days. He rationed what little food he had left, sipped water slowly, paced himself. His body ached, worn down from weeks of malnutrition, stress, and sun. But there was something lighter in his chest. Not joy, not pride. Something closer to relief. The kind that comes when you've made the hardest choice and survived it. When he reached the outpost, no one was waiting. The place was nearly empty. A few local workers nodded politely as he passed. No one recognized him. He was just another sunburned man with dust on his boots and too much silence in his eyes. He found a payphone at a fuel station and called the only number he trusted, Rachel. His sister answered on the second ring. "Tommy?" she said, half breathless. "Are you okay?" He hadn't heard her voice in months. It hit him harder than he expected. "I'm all right," he said, voice rough. "I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "I need you to check my email in a couple hours. I'm sending a few things. Letters, notes, records of what I saw. I don't expect you to believe all of it, but I need you to have it." A pause. "Is this about the lion?" she asked quietly. "The one you didn't shoot?" He closed his eyes. "Yeah," he said, "and the elephant, and everything in between." He hung up before the conversation could turn into something harder. He wasn't ready to explain it all, not yet. But he would be. That evening he found a cheap motel near the edge of town, ate a real meal, took a shower long enough to forget the heat, slept for 10 hours straight. The next morning he sat at a desk with an old laptop and started writing. Not a report, not a resignation. A testimony. He wrote about Zulu, about Theo, about those 17 days in the wilderness where instinct had bent into something unexplainable and yet deeply true. He wrote about the decision not to shoot, the bullet still waiting in the chamber, the lion's stare, the elephant's cry, and how a man who had made a living from death found something worth keeping alive. When he finished, he sent it all to Rachel. Then, without checking for replies, he searched for conservation programs, field training, conflict resolution, anti-poaching patrols, anything that involved protecting instead of killing. One listing caught his eye. Human-Wildlife Coexistence Program, Okavango Delta Region, seeking experienced trackers and behavioral specialists. He laughed softly to himself. "Specialist," he whispered. "Sure." But he filled out the application anyway. At the bottom, where it asked for qualifications, he typed, "I used to be a hunter. Then I met a lion who taught me how to be human again." And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 3 weeks after Wyatt hit send on that job application, he found himself standing in front of a government-issued Jeep, waiting for a woman named Thondi to decide whether he was worth trusting. She looked him up and down without blinking, tall, broad-shouldered, in her 50s, with sun-lined skin and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been working in wildlife conflict management longer than Wyatt had been pulling triggers. "You're the one who walked away from 20 grand, she said, arms crossed. Wyatt nodded. "That's me." "And the lion? The elephant calf?" "Still alive, last I saw." Thondi didn't smile, but something in her gaze softened. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither was the lion. That earned him the job. It didn't pay much, barely enough to cover food and fuel. But he wasn't doing it for money anymore. His work took him village to village, helping farmers build elephant-proof fencing, finding ways to reroute water access without attracting predators, showing communities how to protect their crops without picking up a gun. It was hard. Some days, thankless. Most nights, he slept on the ground again. But for the first time in years, Wyatt didn't feel like he was running from something. He felt like he was building towards something. The story of Zulu and Theo started to spread, quietly at first, passed between field workers and rangers like a whispered myth. A lion protecting a calf, a hunter turning guardian. Some believed it, others laughed it off. Wyatt didn't try to convince them. He'd seen it. That was enough. 6 months in, Thondi sent him to a village near the Botswana border where elephant herds had trampled nearly an entire maize field. The farmers were furious, demanding permission to shoot. Government officials were on edge, tensions high. Wyatt arrived with nothing but a canvas pack, a half-dead GPS unit, and a notebook full of sketches. He spent 3 days listening, really listening. Not explaining, not correcting, just walking with the farmers, mapping their land, asking where the elephants came from, where they went. What he found was simple. The herd wasn't attacking. They were passing through, following an ancient migration route that had been blocked by new fields. The solution wasn't violence. It was a corridor. He worked with the community to clear a narrow, marked path between the fields, just wide enough for elephants to pass without damaging crops. No fences, just space. And it worked. A week later, Wyatt stood still as stone as 30 elephants passed within 10 feet of him, led by a matriarch whose eyes were older than war. They didn't charge. They didn't veer. They walked. The farmers watched in silence. When the last calf had passed, the village elder turned to Wyatt and said, "You understand them." Not a question, a statement. Wyatt thought of Zulu, of Theo, of the 17 days that had rewired something inside him. "I had a good teacher," he replied. After that, the calls came more often. A herd too close to a school, a leopard sighted near a well, communities caught between survival and fear. And always, Wyatt came with the same quiet certainty. There's another way. He wasn't always successful. Sometimes he arrived too late. Sometimes fear still won. But more and more, he saw the tide shifting, slowly, stubbornly. People began to choose understanding over control, respect over domination. One evening, Wyatt received an email from a university researcher requesting an interview. They'd heard his story through the Conservation Network. They wanted to study the behavioral changes he'd witnessed, cross-species empathy, predator-prey cooperation. They wanted data, patterns, proof. Wyatt chuckled at the screen. "You want to measure a miracle?" But he agreed, not because he needed credit, but because maybe, just maybe, understanding it could help others protect it when it happened again. Years passed. He traded his tent for a tiny concrete room at a field station, his phone for a field radio. He lost weight, gained patience, forgot the sound of gunfire, learned to hear the difference between a warning growl and a curious one. One dry season, a ranger brought him a blurry photo taken from a long-range drone. A lion and a young elephant, resting side by side. Wyatt stared at the grainy image for a long time. It could have been anyone. But his gut told him it wasn't. Not just anyone. It was them. Older now, changed, but still there. Still together. He pinned the photo to the wall above his desk. Didn't tell anyone the whole story unless they asked. But when they did, he told it all, not for drama, not for pity, but because somewhere in that story was the proof that what we choose matters. Even once, even just once. A single moment of mercy can ripple outward, changing not just lives, but legacies. If this story moved you even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, even just a word or a feeling. Did something about it stay with you? Did it remind you of anything from your own life? And if you're the kind of person who believes stories like this still matter, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around. Because the next one, well, let's just say it starts with a man, a storm, and a sound no one could explain. I'll see you there.